asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I'll have my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Rap, fire, math, evil, scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my hill. We've been 3D printing, setting ready for that ghost kill.
Hello, Canada, and welcome to another episode of the Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever, and we're at episode number 37. It seems like these episodes are just flying by. Got a full course of the Maple Pill for you tonight. In addition, we'll be talking about Ukraine and Russia and the conflict going on in Ukraine, and essentially how mainstream media and it seems like the politicians are doing their darndest to make sure that this really turns into a hot conflict with NATO being involved in it rather than simply a regional dispute. Why not go for the glory of another world war, right? It really feels that way, or at least from my perspective, it does. But as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts, your opinions in the comment section. And for anyone that's kind of new to the channel, I'm always at the end of the show going to try and read through as many of the chats as I can. And I do try and start at the top of the chat. So those of you that are watching right off the hop here when we start going live, again, I definitely try and give you guys the most attention because I appreciate you guys literally watching this live and hanging out with me every single weekday night. And yeah, let's get into it. So first thing up, we're going to hit upon the Ukraine and Russia conflict. So this is from National Post. Ukraine updates day 6. Ukraine says 5 killed in attack on TV tower near Holocaust memorial site. Russia escalated shelling overnight of key cities in Ukraine as its troops on the ground move slowly in a large convoy towards the capital, Kiev. Now, one thing that we've been discussing at length here over the last few episodes in regards to what's going on in Ukraine is how it seems like the narrative is constantly evolving, and we're seeing a lot of misinformation from both sides. You know, we've already talked about the Ghost of Kiev, the Snake Island 13, and all kinds of other things that were attributed to the conflict today that turns out either to be misstatements, media that was used from, previous movies or from video games and stuff like that. And one thing that kind of stands out to me about this headline is the fact that they focused on, not the fact that a TV tower was hit, but a TV tower near the Holocaust memorial site. And I just got to say, like, what does that really have to do with this conflict? And again, it just feels like this is trying to paint a certain narrative, right? Russia is definitely the bad guy. Don't even think about questioning that narrative because we all agree. Hey, even it seems like pretty much every political party agrees in regards to that, at least every major political party right now in Canada, other than the PPC. And certainly mainstream media from all corners of it, they're definitely on board with this let's go to war with Russia narrative. So I think it's very important that we take everything with a grain of salt right now. And you guys only need to look towards, the defense contractors in the United States. Have you looked at Lockheed Martin or is it Raytheon and what's going on with their share prices? Seems like this Ukraine conflict is actually really good for their business. And seems like they've got a lot of money at their disposal when it comes to lobbying politicians, particularly in the United States. So I'll leave you guys to go down your own rabbit holes there. But just wanted to hit some of the highlights here from this National Post update. And again, I think it's doing a decent job of updating all the major mainstream talking points in regards to what's going on. So continuing to roll on here. Now, this is from the National Post. This is a Rex Murphy piece. Greenism has helped Putin fuel his war. Will the horror of what is occurring in Ukraine wake up the environmentally woke governments of the world to their folly? This is something we started talking about day one when we're talking about the conflict going on in Ukraine, because understand that a big aspect of everything playing out here right now, right, was Russia wanting to build additional pipelines to Europe to sell their petroleum products, and essentially some of the negotiations going on between Russia and Ukraine. Now, who you want to paint as the good guy or bad guy in that situation probably just depends upon where you're getting your news sources from. But just wanted to highlight this from Rex here. So it can subdue every other interest, every other policy and issue to its ordained cause. Apocalyptic certitudes of extinction and planetary collapse explicitly and implicitly bestow an absolutism on the cause. And now this is regard to greenism, right? And the desire to essentially, shut down all petroleum, all, coal energy sources and things of that nature. And this has really created a weird paradox, particularly in Europe. But again, it also applies here in Canada and the United States, where essentially we don't want to tap into our own natural resources, but to get us over this hump period of, someday we'll figure out exactly how to make everything green while still also seeming to shun nuclear energy, which makes really no goddamn sense. But this has created a huge dependency by Europe on Russia, right? And particularly in Germany, but again, it's really across the board there. For some environmentalists, nothing is more important. Not industry, not employment, not national security, and certainly not national economies. Anything that contributes to global warming must yield to their first dogma, that if we do not obey their alarms and edicts, subscribe to their Millerian nightmares, we face nothing less than the end of things. It is the green version of the Bible's revelations. Radical environmentalists are imperious. You must obey their science. You must degrade your economy in the service of dystopian visions. You must dismantle the energy systems of the world, the 21st century communications and commercial systems sustained by oil and gas. The negative consequences which will ineluctably flow from this are unimportant. As to submit to environmentalist scripture is to bring on the end of the world and life upon it. And again, it's really interesting how those with a very specific narrative they're trying to push on the world and very specific set of policies, they've essentially stated that the science is settled when it comes to climate change, or recently we saw them trying to attempt to rebrand it as climate weirdness. That's its own rabbit hole in regards to why they're changing the language now. But understand that it actually isn't necessarily as a open and shut cases they'd like to lead on. And I'm trying to think off the top of my head, Bjorn, I forget his last name, but there's an amazing book that I recently listened to on Audible that was breaking down essentially the climate alarmism that's going on right now. And it's important to understand that these are such dynamic models that a lot of these scientists are using when they're trying to predict what happens, right? We can barely predict, like, we can't make economic models work. What makes us think that we can actually make environmental models to any real degree of accuracy, right? All you need to do is go back and look to the 1960s and 70s, and they were talking about global cooling, right? And about how we were going to be entering a new ice age. And, 40, 50 years later, it seems like the science is completely flip-flopped, and now it's all about climate alarmism and talking about climate change and global warming. Again, that's not to say that humans don't have an impact on the environment. We absolutely do. But to pretend like the environment is in this pristine point of balance if it wasn't for humans isn't true either, right? All life will continue to propagate and dominate to the best of its abilities. I don't think that that's really a controversial view. And yet it seems like when we view humans' impacts, we have a particular jaded lens these days in society. And I really do think that head policies and politicians approached everything going on in the Ukraine over the last decade differently, we probably wouldn't find ourselves at the current moment in time with a conflict going on in the Ukraine. But again, that's my hot take. Let me know what your opinions are. And at some point in time, I'll look up that book and let you guys know what it is. It might be False Alarm. I can't remember, but Bjorn something. Anyways, from the Globe and Mail, Russia-Ukraine live updates, NATO countries not considering no-fly zone over Ukraine. A day after a shelling attack on Ukraine's second largest city and attacks on Kiev TV tower, Russian forces have mounted a major new offensive. Canada will petition the International Criminal Court to probe alleged war crimes. So again, one of the things that I think is important to take a step back and understand right now is, the Russia-Ukraine conflict isn't even the only conflict going on right now. We've got Saudi Arabia, who's been attacking or fighting a proxy war in Yemen for an extended period of time. My understanding is you can look at the airstrikes going on there, but the sort of airstrikes that we see going on a regular basis in Yemen really are comparative in regards to the total casualties of war compared to what we see going on in Ukraine. As well, it wasn't that long ago that didn't Biden, do a drone strike and kill a bunch of women and children. And it's important to understand that it's really easy, depending upon what narrative you're trying to paint someone as the bad guy. And we covered it yesterday in regards to all the different conflicts, proxy wars, and regime change attempts that America and the CIA have made over the last 50 to 70 years in the post-World War II era. And what I want to highlight here is this idea, and we're hearing it from a lot of politicians and a lot of pundits right now about enforcing a no-fly zone over Ukraine. To do that is essentially to play a very dangerous game of chicken with Russia. And so one of two things is going to happen. Either Russia's going to call your bluff, in which case you're going to have to choose whether you actually want to turn this into a hot conflict, right, between NATO and Russia, and no longer just a regional conflict between Ukraine and Russia, or you're going to have to back down. And it seems like throughout this entire conflict, we even heard it from Biden. You can go back and watch some of the press releases from a couple months ago, and he said that, we wouldn't tolerate a major incursion in the Ukraine. And it's like, well, wait, so you'll tolerate a minor incursion in the Ukraine from Russia, but not a major? What's the definition there? And it's important we understand this because, again, that idea of enacting a no-fly zone sounds theoretically like a good idea when you hear it just come out of a pundit who's talking very confidently on the news. But that's absolutely going to take us one step closer, if not right into an outright conflict with Russia. And there are serious consequences there. Again, if you want to support Ukraine, donate till your heart's content. Feel free to join their foreign legion, and you can fly over there and get involved in the conflict yourself. And again, I think that actually goes for any sort of conflict. But one thing that we do need to be aware of is if we are going to say have citizens go in and join a foreign legion, that at that point in time, that citizens made that decision. And I don't think it becomes Canada or NATO's issue to try and bail them out if they find themselves in a dangerous or sticky situation. The same way if people wanted to join, the conflict against ISIS or any other sort of conflict going on throughout the world. Again, that's my opinion. Love to hear your thoughts and your hot takes on this. But the one thing that is really interesting is just how we seem to see all politicians now backing this narrative. Now from the Mises Institute, how economic sanctions against Russia could backfire. And this is definitely worth reading from cover to cover, but just want to highlight a couple points here. So Peter Schiff recently explained how U.S. sanctions against Russia could harm the U.S. economy in the short run and cause even more inflation. But there are also possible long-term consequences for using the dollar as a tool for war. It could accelerate de-dollarization globally and even threaten the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency. The U.S. is a global superpower and maintains an aggressive foreign policy, but the U.S. doesn't only project power across the globe through its massive military, it also weaponizes the U.S. dollar using its economic dominance and its privilege as the issuer of global reserve currency and a carrot-stick tool of foreign policy. Yes, that's very true. And it is something that I think if you really want to be thinking about the long-term consequences of this conflict, pushing Russia into the arms of China and a digital yuan is definitely going to have serious long-term consequences to geopolitical affairs. Again, I'm not saying that we need to judge all of our decisions based upon that framework, but to pretend like there's not going to be consequences here, I think really is naive. And I really am concerned about just how focused on beating the drum war right now all politicians and all mainstream media seems to be. Whenever they're just this confident and they're all in lockstep together, my spidey senses starts tingling. Not sure about you guys. Now from the Ron Paul Institute, and again, this one's a great just reminder about the was it the Rose Rebellion, right, that went on in Georgia back in 2008. So in 2008, as then president of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili realized that his attack on Russian peacekeepers and civilians in South Ossetia had elicited a Russian military response that ended up with the Russian army practically knocking on the door in Tbilisi. He infamously appeared on a BBC interview, voraciously chewing his necktie. It demonstrates to the world that the plucky U.S.-educated leader who dared take on the Russian bear for the sake of democracy was in fact an unhinged and unstable figure, installed into power by the U.S.-led Rose Revolution, who found himself losing it upon realization that he was over his head and the U.S. cavalry were not coming to liberate him. During the course of the 2008 Russian intervention in Georgia, Saakashvili made increasingly outlandish and unhinged claims, including that Georgia's ports and airports will be taken under the control of the U.S. Defense Department. Russia has lost more airplanes than any conflict of this scale since 1939. And the reason that I want to highlight this is it seems like we're so forgetful in this day and age, right? I don't know if it's just the nature of mainstream media and the internet, right, and the 24-hour news cycle, whether it's, willful blindness in regards to remembering these past issues. But this isn't a new narrative, right? Essentially, U.S. or U.S.-backed coalitions, egging on smaller state actors that were former Soviet states and pushing them into direct conflict with Russia. And I can't help but feel like this is at least not a perfect analogy, but very similar to the situation we find right now in Ukraine. Again, looking back to the 2014 Orange Revolution that was backed by Americans as well at that time. Now from Reuters, Canada's Nutrien eyes prolonged global fertilizer disruption from invasion of Ukraine. I just wanted to highlight this because I didn't see a lot of talks about this so far. We've already been following along on the Maple Pill for 37 plus episodes. Some of the supply chain issues that we're experiencing. We've talked about how farmers, particularly in Western Canada, are struggling to get access to all their inputs necessary to keep their farms operating at 100%. And this could, in theory, present an opportunity for Saskatchewan and potash, but it also definitely could have consequences to North American farming if we start to see a disruption to fertilizers. Understand that our agriculture right now depends upon, shoving a lot of nutrients and nitrogen into the soil in order to continue the type of farming and agriculture that we currently implement in the West. Now from the National Post, 1 in 4 support Canadian armed forces joining the fight against Russia, poll finds. We're pretty bullish about entering the fray, said John Wright, Executive Vice President of Meru Public Opinion. Now, I don't know whether this is the president of Meru Public Opinion, really, or the vice president, I should say, really trying to beat the war drum, whether this is very specific, choosing of language in the headlines and bylines by the media here, the National Post. But I don't feel like, a 25% of people supporting Canadian armed forces joining the fight in Russia is actually saying that we're pretty bullish about entering the fray. I would say if 75% of Canadians aren't pushing that, I wouldn't say that we as Canada are bullish at all. Just want to highlight one point here. Canadians stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukrainians in every possible manner here, said John Wright, Executive Vice President of Meru Public Opinion, which released the poll. We're pretty bullish about entering the fray. I think that's the first thing that I take away from this. Is that really the first thing you take away from this? Because again, it's very interesting because the majority, 46%, agreed in the poll that enough is being done and nothing more is currently necessary. We are, as a country, split on the strategic options. There is no consensus in terms of how we should effectively be responding to this, Wright said. So again, we essentially have half Canadians saying, hey, we think what we're doing is more than adequate. I don't see a reason to do anything more. And yet somehow the pollsters here are taking away that we're bullish on entering the fray. This feels suspiciously like choosing the narrative and then finding the facts to back up the narrative you want rather than actually focusing on the poll. And when I see this sort of language, if this is how the pollsters are actually projecting it to the media, then I can't help but wonder how biased they are in actually trying to get to the bottom of this data. And if it's actually just the media cherry picking in order to try and, beat the war drum a little bit further and get people worked up into desiring to get involved in this conflict. I just want to say I've got no interest in being involved in this conflict. I definitely don't think any Canadian should go and die right now on Ukrainian soil for what's a regional conflict that honestly probably could have been avoided. We're past that point at this time, but again, there are solutions that don't involve going to a full-scale war with Russia. And I know that right now that'll get you like lambasted on most parts of Twitter and social media as being a Putin apologist. No, it's very possible to think that Putin's a bad guy and to think that the situation in Ukraine could have been avoided, but that we also don't need to interject ourselves into every national conflict, right? Or every international conflict. Again, one of the best examples I can think of right off the bat is the Uyghur Muslims in China. It seems like we're all okay turning a blind eye to that. But all of a sudden, Russia trying to take back areas of Ukraine that appear to be majority Russian speakers, and depending upon who you believe, it sounds like even parts of those areas wanted to rejoin Russia. That's a step too far. But millions of people in concentration camps, that's an inconvenient truth that we'll just avoid for this period of time. Now, switching gears and getting into our first blue pill story of the day. I actually thought I had one more story, but I must have forgotten to open it. But anyway, switching gears to our blue pill story. This is from CTV News. Black medical students on how they and BLM are changing their schools. And I find this narrative interesting, to say the least, and something that I think we should keep an eye on. This is a direct quote from one of the students. I found that there isn't this huge malicious intent necessary for people to not improve their curriculum or not necessarily improve what they're teaching medical students. But many just don't have that lived experience, she said, adding that lecturers, administrators, and fellow students need to look for ways to give their Black peers the space to openly critique issues such as microaggressions, the lack of collecting race-based data overall, and increasing Black enrollment. So again, when it comes to any sphere of employment, when it comes to any aspect of the economy, I would much rather see a meritocracy rather than race-based hiring policies, right? I'd much rather have the best doctors treating me than rather make sure that we're checking off the diversity checklist when it comes to, who becomes a doctor. And this idea that we need to change the way we're teaching medical students to make them more aware of things such as microaggressions seems very strange to me. I'm not sure exactly how microaggressions come into play when it comes to like treating me for a medical issue, right? It just seems really bizarre. I don't think that every aspect of society needs to be focused on Black Lives Matter, on anti-racism, on, dismantling microaggressions and making everything about identity politics at this point in time. But again, there at least as a subsegment of our population and a large portion of our politicians and mainstream corporate press legacy media that are very focused on pushing this narrative. And just want to highlight this one quote: being anti-racist is a very active process, and it's something that doesn't have an endpoint. It's something that's ongoing, and it takes experience. So I can't help but feel like this is very 1984-esque, right? The war is never meant to be won, right? We're meant to be always in a state of conflict. We're meant to always be fighting this battle. And we're going to always be fighting the anti-racist battle because, as stated by the individual here that's saying that we need to improve the way we teach medicine, it doesn't have an endpoint. I don't know. Personally, the reason I highlight this is because we're going to see more and more of this in the years to come if we as a society don't start actually really paying attention to what's going on in our institutions, and particularly post-secondary institutions, if we don't start really leading the way when it comes to culture. Again, that doesn't mean that you can't have as many Black doctors as are capable of finding themselves in that position, but just to focus on, collecting race-based data overall in order to make sure that we're increasing Black enrollment specifically. It's so bizarre to me how a lot of this critical race theory, the praxis behind it, feels very racist, where everything's about identity politics, everything's about figuring out what race you are, and then, rewarding you or detracting you based upon where you land on the spectrum. Again, just not the society I want to participate in. Now from CTV News, Ontario lifts nearly all major COVID-19 restrictions. We're definitely taking a step in the right direction, but as I kind of went on a rant yesterday, I personally, again, I'm not going to be a patron of any restaurant that was willing to discriminate me when it was legal. So now that it's no longer promoted by the government, if they're willing to not discriminate against me, again, I don't think that actually makes them worthy of my patronage. But again, you guys do you. I understand a lot of people are happy to be able to, integrate at least to a greater degree back into society. That is a net benefit overall. So I'm not trying to be too black-pilled on this. Now, another one from CTV News. This is just weird. And so I'd love to get your guys' thoughts, your opinions, and perspectives on this. Essentially, CTV News is talking about two incidences of anti-Ukraine vandalism, I guess would be the best way. And one looked very heated. So I'm not going to play the whole clip for you guys, but I do want to just bring up a portion of it because this just seems so bizarre to me. And I'm not even sure, who are the people that are enacting this, right? If you saw someone with a Ukraine flag on their house or in their car, who's going to be the person that goes and slashes their tires? Is it Russian Canadians? Is it people that are anti-Ukrainian? It honestly doesn't compute for me. I don't even understand. But hey, it turns out there's actually a lot of things these days in our society I don't understand.
The other in Etobicoke, the victims in both cases say they believe they were targeted because they were flying the Ukraine flag on their vehicles, but they say this won't intimidate them from showing their support. Cell phone video captures part of an alleged hate crime in Vaughan Sunday. A red Range Rover cuts off another vehicle. A person gets out and is seen smashing the rear passenger window.
Like the
Gets
Sorry
out
about that.
and is seen smashing the rear passenger window.
But like, that's absolutely fucked. Like, who the hell does that? If this is truly about them flying a Ukrainian flag, wild. Thankfully, they did catch the person in the red Range Rover. They have been charged, so that is good. And the other story essentially shows how one gentleman who had Ukraine flags on his vehicle, two of his vehicles had all 8 tires slashed. And again, this is just bizarre to me. Are you guys hearing about more of these stories? Are these isolated incidences? Any idea, like, who would be motivated? Is it like, I can't imagine Russian citizens doing this, just because I don't understand how they wouldn't expect greater backlash for this. But again, I don't know. Now from the Ottawa Citizen, Canada ignores Russia's militarized Arctic at our own risk. So this is something we've only touched upon lightly, but again, if you guys want to go deeper into it, understand that, you know, down the road, it does seem like we'll probably find ourselves in conflict with Russia over the regions of the North Pole, right? Presumably there's lots of natural resources beneath the ice there. So again, it's interesting. I think that one thing to be aware of is, if I understand correctly, like, Canada doesn't even have an icebreaker right now capable of circumnavigating those waters. So that probably, if we wanted to try and defend our claims there, that'd probably be step one. Like Ukraine, the region is perceived by Vladimir Putin as an integral part of his country. Several modern Arctic warfare bases house, operate, and are testing some of Russia's most advanced weapons. Now, again, the one thing that I do think is a little bit different about the Canada-Ukraine situation is, like, one, obviously, this isn't a populated area. Two, there is more of an international stake in this regards, right? Because if I remember correctly, parts of the North Pole are like the northern top of the planet is kind of like international lands there. And then finally, we are a member of NATO. So in theory, our allies should come to our defense if Russia was to invade our sovereign territory. Now, this one gets us into our first red pill story of the day. And it's just interesting, the different conclusions that we're seeing being pushed in mainstream media right now. So this one is from BNN. COVID vaccines kept protecting teens after Omicron surge, from BNN. And then we can switch over to CNBC. Pfizer COVID vaccine was just 12% effective against Omicron in kids 5 to 11, study finds. So at this point in time, it seems hard to know whether you're coming or going. I can't tell whether they're going to double down on, you know, pushing vaccines and the COVID narrative, or whether we're all just going to switch gears and use Ukraine as a convenient scapegoat at this point in time to be able to just kind of let the COVID narrative collapse upon itself. I'd love to hear your thoughts and predictions in that comment section. Now from the Toronto Star, citing thought-provoking anti-vax sources, Ontario judge rules couples' kids should not be vaccinated. So quick synopsis, and again, if you guys want to jump into it, link in the video description down below to all the stories we're talking about. But essentially, a mother and father were fighting over whether to get their children vaccinated. The father wanted them to, the mother didn't. There's 3 kids, 2 are with the mom, 1 is with the father. More so than even focusing on this story, what I just wanted to highlight is no one's a winner when you end up playing a tug of war with your children in court. And so I think, you know, it's really unfortunate that the parents found themselves at the point that they were in front of a justice in the first place in order to have the state make this decision. Just feels like overall a loss for everyone. Now, this story focuses on highlighting how the judge is perceived. So I'll just read it to you. In a lengthy ruling, Justice Alex Pazaretes refers to several discredited sources of anti-vax misinformation as actually more informative and more thought-provoking than those filed by a Hamilton father who is seeking to vaccinate his children. Very clear that the Toronto Star had a specific angle they wanted to focus on here. But again, regardless of the fact that the mom won this and doesn't have to get her kids vaccinated, I don't think that there's a winner when you start involving the state in these decisions. And whenever possible, you should literally try and avoid roping the state into these things. Now from the Toronto Star, PwC Canada hit with $1 million in fines after 1,200 employees caught cheating on training tests. So if you guys aren't familiar, you know, Price Waterhouse Cooper, one of the largest big four. I think there's still just four of them, right? Big four accounting firms. Used to be five, but Arthur Andersen fell apart after I'm drawing a blank here. Not WorldCom, but what was it? Started with like an E. I was just talking about earlier today. But anyways, what's interesting here is 1,200 employees isn't an insignificant amount. And if you guys want to go down the rabbit hole of reading this article, I encourage you to. But I just kind of want to use this as a point of discussion. I think that we see so many rules, regulations, so many, professional development, they call them PD courses, and desire to like keep everyone updated. But it's never really explained why so much of this training and jumping through hoops is actually necessary to the average practitioner. And what ends up happening is a giant disconnect occurs between the practitioner and what the governing bodies believe those practitioners need to focus on and learn, right? And what ends up happening is you create these cultures of people that get very comfortable looking the other way. And I suspect that, you know, how PwC will likely try and fix this is by forcing more rules, more regulations, more testing, more requirements upon their average employee. And I think that that's actually counterproductive to this. Again, just kind of my hot take there. If you guys don't know, I am a CPA. I worked in public accounting for, I think it was about 5 years, and then switched into working for a publicly traded pharmaceutical company. So definitely know a little bit about this, and it doesn't shock me that it was this widespread. It just shocks me that it was, I guess, this organized, that they were able to catch 1,200 people kind of at once for cheating on these training tests. But again, that's just my hot take. I think that that's true when you get into medicine as well, when you get into any sort of professional development. Because again, so many of these people that are focused on, you know, what are the rules, regulations, requirements for the professions, they're no longer even active practitioners. They're actually just focused on like compliance, and they're just focused on PR and things of that nature. And it ends up creating a huge disconnect between your everyday practitioner and the people that are trying to enforce these rules. From Rebel News, despite recent ban on Russian state broadcaster, Canadian bureaucrats won't commit to banning Chinese state media. The admission comes after the House of Commons voted to ban Kremlin finance broadcaster Russia Today. Now, in my opinion, we shouldn't be banning anyone's propaganda. It'd be much better to let all propaganda out and just kind of like identify it, right? But if we are going to be banning Russia Today, it is interesting that we're not comfortable banning the CCP propaganda. And I'll let you guys do your own research, but there's actually like a Canadian senator that was appointed by Justin Trudeau, who oftentimes seems like he's actually just a CCP puppet that's just, spewing their talking points regularly on Twitter. But I'll leave that at that. Rebel News. Liberals vetoed their own promised ban on foreign-owned real estate. Trudeau's Liberals are no strangers to backpedaling on campaign promises. Now, again, I don't love government regulation and intervention. There's a lot of things wrong with how our economy is being managed. I used air quotes there, as well as how our real estate markets essentially progressing right now. This rule or this regulation wouldn't have really solved a lot of things, in my opinion, but it is interesting that, they make one promise and essentially backpedal on it. And if I was being red-pilled or black-pilled about this, I'd probably point out how much, foreign contributions the Trudeau Foundation receives. Or I'd maybe highlight, the pay for access events that Justin Trudeau and other prominent liberals use, that a lot of wealthy Chinese CCP members use to apparently gain access, but presumably they're not buying influence from our politicians, right? The Finance Committee, by a 6-5 vote, rejected a Conservative motion to amend Bill C-8, the Underused Housing Tax Act, to prohibit the purchase of residential property by non-resident foreigners for 2 years. Conservative and New Democrat MPs supported the temporary ban. Liberal and Bloc Québécois MPs opposed it. So again, I think if you really want to understand this entire thread, go back to yesterday's video and actually read that thorough global news article from Sam Cooper talking about the one Chinese billionaire and the $154 million in Canadian real estate that he owns and controls, and then use that as a springboard to actually jump in and grab a copy of Sam Cooper's book, Willful Blindness, that really exposes what's going on here in the Canadian real estate market and, CCP influence over our politicians and institutions. Now, this is from Twitter, but I think it's worth bringing up. Michael Sanger, the U.S. CDC revised its COVID risk formula with over 2/3 of the country going from high risk to low or medium risk overnight. The miracles of science. And it is very bizarre because they don't actually point to much, right? And in order to explain what's going on here, we covered it yesterday, but the CDC is also backpedaling on, what percentage of Americans need to be wearing masks right now. So it's essentially stated that over 70% of Americans don't need to be wearing masks at this stage of the pandemic. But without very concrete evidence and thresholds and milestones to explain these things, it's very difficult for me to want to give politicians, health officials, scientists the benefit of the doubt and not think that this is policy politics rather than health policy that we're seeing at play at this moment in time. We are in, 2022, the U.S. midterm elections are on the horizon. I think, is it tonight that Biden's actually giving his State of the Union address, right? So again, I imagine a big part of this, I wouldn't be surprised to hear him declare that we've, won the war on COVID or we're about to win the war on COVID, because I think otherwise the Democrats will get decimated in these midterm elections. Now, want to highlight this from Sarah Fisher. I don't think Pablo Rodriguez has a clue what type of online content will be captured and regulated under Bill C-11. And again, I've been beating the drum on this for a while, but this is important, right? We are literally going to lose any semblance of free speech, of transparent media here in Canada if we let these bills pass. And so it's important that we see politicians, that we see the public starting to demand answers and essentially, I think, showcasing our displeasure with this proposed policy. But let's listen to the backpedaling here.
Which a commercial
Minister,
content.
with all due respect, I have a short amount of time. Please answer my question. How do you define programs?
I don't understand, sorry, your question. What exactly do you mean by that?
Sure. So in Bill C-11, it regulates the uploading and the transmission of programs. That's the word used in the legislation. So if that's what it's doing, I'm wondering what is meant by programs.
Well, I think I know what you mean by making reference to all the discussion we had about the user-generated content and all the people or those different programs that
Minister,
you're talking about, right?
So what I hear you saying then is that programs includes user-generated content.
No, they're not. That's what I'm saying.
you just stated.
No, that's what I'm saying. It doesn't. That's why
So then
I think you're referring
Minister,
back.
what is the program?
It's Canadian stories. It's the music. It's the film. Which is a commercial.
Minister,
content.
with all due respect.
Honestly, this is so frustrating because they're purposely being so obfuscating in regards to explaining what programming is. At some point in time, they're going to expand that definition. They may tell us today that it's only going to be this, sliver of Canadian content that's going to fall under Bill C-11, but they've left themselves the wiggle room to make it everything. And so understand, if Bill C-11 passes, if we see the anti-hate speech regulations make it through as well, all that shit, shows like this will be illegal in Canada. I don't know if I'll be able to just have a VPN in the United States or whether they'll actually come after people on Rumble and stuff, but we'll absolutely see YouTube, Facebook, and a lot of other big tech platforms, bow to the pressures of the Canadian government. And we'll just see, user-generated content will become decimated based upon these policies. And it's not because they're trying to do what's best for the average Canadian citizen. It's because they want to make sure they control the narrative. It's because they hate the fact that Pandora's box, the internet, it has been opened, and they're praying that there's a way through regulation and policy that they can actually, snap shut that lid again in order to make sure that, hey, you've only got CTV News, Global News, and CBC to turn to in order to get your Canadian content. And hey, oh, by the way, we actually pay for the vast majority of the CBC, and we also give hundreds of millions of dollars every year to those other broadcasters as well. There's a giant conflict of interest, and it honestly just highlights how little they think of the average Canadian, that they don't think that we can put two and two together to draw the conclusion that, like, oh yeah, all of our media is captured by the government institutions and their government funding, right? How many of these media platforms would actually, like these media companies, would be in business if all of a sudden all their funding dried up, right? The CBC would disappear overnight. I think we'd see massive cutbacks in CTV News and Global News. And people will naturally say, like, oh, but that's going to destroy it. We won't have as much Canadian content. No, that will actually be like, like when a forest fire burns through a forest and clears out all the dead wood, and all of a sudden it allows then new growth to pop up. But right now we've got this giant canopy over our media landscape that doesn't allow, people like Rebel News, True North, Counter Signal with Keenan, all those individuals that are creating user-generated, field reporters, citizen reporting. They can't survive or flourish right now under the circumstances, because essentially it's such a one-sided battle, with the government providing all kinds of resources, all kinds of support to the large multi-media companies that are already the incumbents here in Canada. Just want to highlight this from Medscape. This is this is almost a clown pill here, but antibodies derived from natural COVID infection are more abundant and at least 10 times more potent than immunity generated by vaccination alone. That's not something we should ignore, scientists say. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. Kind of feels like a lot of us have been thinking this and saying it for a while now, but can always appreciate defiant L's to highlight the hypocrisy of a lot of these blue check marks. So their tweet from November 22nd, 21. So again, less than, 4 months ago. Republicans fighting President Biden's vaccine mandate are wielding a new weapon against the White House rules, natural immunity. And then the tweet that they put out that I just read to you, antibodies derived from natural COVID infection are more abundant and at least 10 times more potent than immunity generated by vaccination alone. That's not something we should ignore, scientists say. So what's changed over the last 3 or 4 months? It went from being Republicans essentially are using a weapon against Democrats and their reasonable policies when it comes to vaccine mandates to, oh yeah, shit, definitely natural immunity is better. Interesting. Now, wanted to highlight this from True North. Freeland caught holding pro-Nazi banner at Ukraine protest. So for those of you that maybe haven't been paying attention to this, this red and black banner here is actually those colors are associated with, I guess, the Nazi movement in Ukraine. We've covered it a little bit in the past, essentially back in, was it 2014, 2015, during the Orange Revolution. Canada provided funding to one of the Nazi regiments in Ukraine that were fighting the Russian insurgents and things of that nature. And so the reason that I'm highlighting this here is just, again, she literally called every trucker Nazis, right? They call us racist. They call us misogynist. They're now calling us rapists. But at the same time, she's literally holding a banner. And now it may be that she didn't realize that banner was being pulled out. It may be she didn't understand what that banner is. However, understand back in 2017, Chrystia Freeland actually claimed that Russian agents were providing disinformation about her heritage. And Russia was actually actively claiming that she's on side with the pro-Nazi movement in Ukraine. So again, it's hard for me to want to give her the benefit of the doubt here. Later, like, she literally posted this on her own Twitter and then afterwards removed it and replaced it with a photo that didn't show that banner, which is interesting in and of itself, where they essentially just cropped it out so you couldn't see it. If you guys want to read the entire article, I'll link in the video description down below. But then I want to highlight these two articles from back in 2017. Chrystia Freeland's granddad was indeed a Nazi collaborator, so much for Russian disinformation. So again, she claimed that Russia was providing disinformation about her grandparents and their involvement in World War II and essentially being part of a pro-Nazi propaganda media outlet in the Ukraine. And again, don't just take the Ottawa Citizen's word for it. Here's an article from the Globe and Mail. Freeland knew her grandfather was editor of Nazi newspaper. So again, it's fascinating how often these people project on us, right? We're misogynists, but Justin Trudeau is the one that actually groped a reporter, right, at a Liberal fundraiser back in whenever it was, 2014, 2015. He's the one that seems to have some shady allegations from the prep schools he taught at, right, in regards to inappropriate relationships. Chrystia Freeland calls us Nazis, but she actually literally has a grandfather that was a Nazi collaborator, and she gets photoed holding a banner that essentially is part of the Nazi movement or the Nazi regiment in Ukraine. Sorry. So again, just really interesting how often these people seem to project on us. Now from Blacklock's reporter, government ready 2 years later. And this feels like it should be from the Beaverton rather than Blacklock's reporter, but it turns out Beaverton is never funny, and the real news is actually almost always clown pill. Government ready 2 years later. The Public Health Agency yesterday said it is now almost fully stocked with pandemic medical supplies 2 years after the outbreak of COVID. The agency to date has not explained why it ignored its own planners in failing to maintain a 4-month supply of masks, medical gowns, and other goods. And understand, we've now got an 8-week stockpile. So again, their own planners told them they should have 4 months. They're now telling us that they're ready because they've got it up to 2 months. And it took 2 years to get 2 months supply of these medical emergency materials. We talked about this in the past, but it's worth reminding you guys and reminding myself. A subsequent 2011 evaluation of the national stockpile system repeated the agency must maintain pandemic preparedness supplies. The agency instead closed 3 of 11 warehouses and landfilled 8,839,000 masks, gowns, and other goods in the year prior to the outbreak of COVID. Goods were thrown away to save $900,000 a year in warehouse leasing costs, though the agency was fully funded at the time with a $675 million annual budget. Yep. We're literally just all of our institutions are run by clowns. I just wanted to highlight for you guys, if you somehow missed it, Visor recently just was forced to release a ton of information about the vaccine efficacy and adverse events related to the vaccine. So I encourage you guys, there's 2 links in the video description down below if you want to read through it. Both of these links are from the Public Health and Medical Professionals for Transparency documents. So the second link essentially is just highlighting all the different documents. The first link is highlighting a specific set of documents that was released today. So again, links in the video description down below to that stuff. And there seems to be some interesting stories kind of breaking around it, but I haven't had a chance to read through all of it and really parse things out, so I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I'm sure we'll be talking about it in the days to come. Now from True North, First Nations mothers fighting $35,000 in fines for going to buy groceries and diapers. And this is actually this is even more absurd than you probably realize. So based upon this article here, it sounds like the only grocery store in this town had been closed for over a month at the point in time that these mothers decided to drive over an hour to go to the next nearest store to buy supplies. As well, they had a grocery delivery service that was way backed up and missing deliveries. And so literally 7 mothers were each fined the maximum $5,000 for daring to go grocery shopping during a pandemic. Again, I encourage you guys to look into this. This isn't about health and safety. This is about making sure that you're compliant, right? This is about making sure that you toe the line, that you constantly live in fear, and that you only look to the government for your solutions. And this should not be acceptable in Canada, in my humble opinion. Now from another one from True North, study shows Canada's high pandemic spending achieved low results. The report showed no clear relationship between high level of government spending on the pandemic and better health and economic outcomes. The report revealed that Canada was the 5th largest spender with pandemic spending. This is amongst G20 countries, with pandemic spending totaling 15.9% of GDP. However, it talks about how countries like South Korea spent less than the average of the G20 countries, and actually, fared far better than anything Canada experienced. But again, I think the more important thing here is just understanding that we spent on the pandemic almost 16% of our GDP, right? We've just literally opened up the printing presses. We're going into unprecedented levels of debt. Our economy is not stronger for any of this, any of the lockdowns, the mandates, the government spending. And we're actually, in my opinion, in a very vulnerable moment in time from our economic perspective, despite the fact you wouldn't know it if you looked at the stock market or crypto or Bitcoin or anything like that. I literally don't understand why or how the markets aren't reacting to what's going on in Russia. Because, again, if it's half as serious as the mainstream media is constantly telling us it is, you would think that there'd be severe economic consequences to that, particularly shutting Russia out of the SWIFT payment system. But, everyone just wants to see number go up, economics. So, I don't know, maybe we can all just keep pretending like the coyote as he runs off a cliff. And as long as we don't look down, there won't be any consequences. Now from the Liberty Beacon, Canadian senators debate universal basic income legislation. So this is something I haven't been seeing get nearly as much attention, but essentially the idea here is that our finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, she'd be in charge of rolling out a pilot program. This is called Bill S233. So if you guys want to look further into it, I encourage you guys to check it out. I understand that a lot of people have great intentions when it comes to basic income. I don't think that we've ever seen government intervention solve real issues. And what I mean by that is think about the war on drugs, right? Think about the war on poverty. Think about, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. Think about literally whenever the government gets involved in like anything. Do we really end up better for it? No, I think that really government should just be focused on not coercing us to do things, but they should actually be trying to create freedom from coercion for us, right? As Ludwig von Mises explains in a lot of his writings. Now, moving on to the clown pill, though. This is from Louder with Crowder. We make art, not war. Russian porn stars get locked out of OnlyFans accounts following Russia's sanctions. This is just weird. Literally, that's all I've got to say. This idea of penalizing all the Russian citizens, and we're also even hearing from Ukraine wanting to punish essentially Russian, like former Russian citizens that live in the Ukraine, expats, as well as just like ethnic Russians in Ukraine. They literally want to in place and have severe consequences to the entire population. Now, if you want to radicalize Russia against the West, I think making sure that your average person pays consequences for Putin's actions, probably that's a good way to radicalize them behind their leader, is to make them feel isolated, to make it feel like the West wants to punish every Russian and demonize every Russian. Now, again, a Russian porn star again cut out of OnlyFans, not a hill I'm going to die on. But it does, I think, showcase the times we're in, right? When we've got like newspaper articles of people pouring out bottles of vodka that are already owned. When we see desires to essentially penalize everyone in Russia with Bitcoin addresses, regardless of their affiliation with the government. This is essentially declaring economic war on every Russian citizen. I don't think that that's a net good idea if we actually want to see peace prevail eventually in regards to this conflict. Next, from the Toronto Sun, another clown pill. Naked driver arrested in bizarre Cambridge incident. An unidentified man faces numerous charges. This was just weird. I saw it in multiple headlines, so I thought I'd share with you guys if you wanted to read a less serious but very bizarre article. Now moving on to a couple white pills here. So the first one I want to highlight for you guys is Alberta drops mask mandates, stops municipalities from imposing their own mask mandates. In a press conference on Tuesday, Premier Jason Kenney said that public health is a provincial, not municipal matter. Now, in theory, I would have thought, like, does this really matter? But we already saw, I always forget, but is it the mayor of Edmonton or the mayor of Calgary is super woke and really wants to push hard on making sure that they can actually institute, COVID policies and mandates on on their regional or municipal level, rather than kind of taking the lead from the provincial leaders. So again, this is technically a good thing. I think the more we can see politicians getting comfortable with actually being like, hey, you know what? We should just let Canadians go back to normal. That is a white pill. I don't know. These days, I kind of struggle with finding good white pills, guys. So if you've got good white pill stories, let me know on the Maple Pill Discord channel. Link to the Discord in the video description down below. Again, this is from the Counter Signal. Kenya to ban local mask laws in Alberta, infuriating lockdowners. So if you just want to read Keenan's perspective there it is. And then finally, want to also highlight as a white pill for you guys, this conversation between Eric Weinstein and Peter McCormick in the podcast What Bitcoin Did. If you're looking to, just hear high-level conversations about politics, Bitcoin, government policies, unintended consequences of government policies, I think this is a great conversation and definitely a podcast worth checking out. So again, link in the video description down below. And then finally, as one other white pill I thought I'd share with you guys is we do have the mailbag song. So if you guys missed out on it yesterday, I did a Monday 8:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time a mailbag episode where I hung out with Dan, the NFT boy, and he's actually made for us a custom mailbag song. So a reminder, if you guys want to send me mail, I actually moved it over there, but it seems like about once a week I'm at least getting a letter or a postcard from you guys. I really appreciate the good vibes, and I appreciate the vibes of this cool song as well.
Welcome to the Mailbag Monday show with your host Matt McKeever. Let's open some mails, leave some smoke trails. Mailbag Monday. Send Matt a pack and it's gonna be a fun day. Mailbag Monday. Send Matt a pack, live stream every Monday. Mailbag Monday. Send Matt a pack and it's gonna be a fun day. Mailbag Monday. Send Matt a pack, live stream every Monday. Welcome to the live stream. This is Dan the Lost Boy with Project LB52 and Space Monkey Fight Club. Get your avatar and custom song today.
All right. So again, really appreciate Dan putting that together for us. And finally want to end with the meme of the day, and then I'll get into your chats. So again, this to me just really highlights this moment in time where essentially everyone wants to, if you're not pro-Ukraine and NATO's involvement in the Ukraine conflict, everyone wants to immediately paint you as a Putin apologist. And honestly, I feel like I fit in this Venn diagram right here. So Putin is a brutal tyrant and his actions are evil. We have no business getting involved. And then finally, expansionist NATO policy has stoked the fires of conflict for decades. And there's me right in the middle. This feels like a perfect definition of where I find myself right now, where I'm like, yeah, this whole situation fucked. It's not as cut and dry as you'd like to make it out to be. And I don't want to see Canadian soldiers dying in Ukraine over this conflict that honestly could have been avoided had we taken a completely different approach to NATO expansionist policies over the last decade. So again, that's my hot take. Love to always hear what your guys' opinions are in regards to all this. And we'll jump into the chat and check in with you guys. And again, appreciate all you guys that are constantly, hitting that like and subscribe button. If you hate watching this show on Big Tech, I don't blame you. You can always watch the replays on Rumble and BitChute. Link to those channels in the video description down below. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's Matt McKeever Unfiltered for my unfiltered, more political oriented and current affairs opinions. You can also follow me, Matt McKeever 85, if you want to see a more watered down version of me and a little bit more real estate and economic stuff. We've got Aislinn in the chat. We've got April Simmons. They can't predict the weather for the next day. How in the world can they really predict what will happen in the environment? Yeah, these are very complex models, and I can't help but think that there's motivations and there's reasons that they push the policies that they're pushing in regards to it. And understand that even someone that just simply gets paid to study climate change, right? Arguably, it's in their personal best interest to want to see it as a serious issue. So I just want to pull up here from my Audible account. It's False Alarm by Bjorn Lomborg. Fantastic book, just kind of breaking down, in my opinion, a lot of the climate alarmism that we're currently experiencing. Well-researched. I believe he's a well-respected individual as well in his field. So again, encourage you guys to check that out if you're so inclined. Terry says, mainstream media always tries to galvanize the public with the agenda. Thank you, Maple Pill. Appreciate it, Terry. Al says, man, I'm late. How many pills did I miss? Well, we had a decent course. These days, it really feels like I've got too many red and black pills, but also I think that's just the state of the world. And while I'm never trying to, get anyone into a point of hopelessness or, real angst or anxiety, because that's not my goal with the Maple Pill. If anything, I just want to highlight for you guys the craziness that is the modern times, but also remind you, you're not alone on this journey. There are like-minded individuals out there. At least a handful of us watch this show and hang out here every single night, and more watch the replays. And we've also got the Maple Pill, the Problems or Profits Discord, where you can surround yourself with like-minded individuals and people that are focused on not only commenting and displaying the crazy times we live in, but also focused on actually getting control of their personal lives and the trajectories of their lives, right? So we, despite what mainstream media and politicians want you to believe, we actually do have a lot more control over our personal situations. You can focus on getting your health in order, your financial life in order. You can focus on getting your personal relationships in order. And honestly, I think that that's the biggest fuck you can give to the system, the politicians, the World Economic Forum, whoever you kind of identify as they. That's the biggest middle finger I can think of, is literally just living the best life while still being informed, right? Going into everything eyes wide open, but not allowing them to fill you with despair or fear. April Simmons, he has no idea what it would take to take on Russia. The Canadian military is amazing, but not that amazing. No way we could take them on without more NATO countries. Yes, absolutely agree. And again, there would still be serious consequences, right? Like, how does this end? Are we going to push back Russia? Do we need to literally do a regime change and invade or get Russia to expel Putin? Like, it just feels like right now, everyone's just focused on like next step. Let's just focus on the next step of escalation here, and we'll figure out everything else afterwards. No, that's kind of what got us into this fucking situation in the first place, is constantly NATO egging on former Soviet satellites and former Warsaw Pact members to join NATO, to give a middle finger to Russia, to try and block their pipeline campaigns and things of that nature. And again, I'm not trying to paint Russia as the good guys here, but I also don't want to paint them as pure evil, because one, life situations are just never that simple and clear cut. And secondly, that sort of polarization of view only allows us to make more stupid decisions in the future if we take that view. Oh my gosh, the discussion is Canadian Armed Forces possibly joining. Yeah. Sandra says, hi, thanks for your lives. Can't always join it live, but do later. Appreciate it, Sandra, and appreciate the comment. Terry says, watch the Ukraine conflict turn into another control play from governments. Absolutely, right? These financial sanctions and even just the normalization of penalizing the citizens of a regime or a government for the actions of that government or regime is a step in the wrong direction, in my opinion. Because how soon until, they decide that your social credit score or the political party you voted for or your ESG score isn't sufficient enough, or your environmental impact is too significant. And so because of that, they need to restrict your access to finances. They need to restrict your access to resources and things of that nature. Again, I don't like what I see going on. JJ says, either way, the West will fall. The West needs this war so everyone forgets the vaccine debacle and war crimes created with that. So they created this, always have a fail-safe. It definitely feels like they've always got a plan B or another emergency, right? There's always another emergency on the horizon. Again, they still got climate change in the chamber as well. So if it turns out that this conflict in Ukraine peters out, they'll either be able to crank up the COVID fear again because there'll be a new variant or something like that. Or, we've heard them talking about the more transmissible and more, I think it was deadly as well, HIV. trying to forget what that strain was called, but yeah. And then they've also still got climate change to fall back on. Al says, "Oh yeah, Matt. Fact: all restaurants and stores that enforced all mandates to the fullest. My Missoula's money are going elsewhere. 100% agree." And yeah, again, we need to vote with our wallet, right? And this isn't about like, to me, it's not even about penalizing businesses that didn't give a shit about their customers. It's about rewarding businesses that were willing to take on risks, right? Businesses that were willing to do the right thing despite the threat of fines, despite the threat of like their resources, their equipment, their businesses being seized or shuttered by the government. Those individuals, in my opinion, are the true patriots, the true freedom fighters. And so we need to be proactive and making sure that they get supported. It's apparently up to the business owners on whether or not they lift the Vax Pass. Watch how many will still keep them. Absolutely. And I think that we should have a long memory as well. So again, just like refuse to become a patron of them, right? And when someone's like, hey, do you want to go to restaurant A or restaurant B? You know, if restaurant A is still was pro lockdowns, they were constantly pushing the vax mandate, and restaurant B wasn't, I'm going to go after restaurant B. Again, also, like most restaurant food, it's garbage anyways, and kind of poison. So again, it's literally probably the best financial decision, the best health decision, and also just like the ethical decision, in my opinion. Dr. Jordan Peterson quit his tenure at U of T for this very reason. Hiring is not based on abilities after getting a degree, is based on BLM, LGBT. Yes, 100% agree. And again, it's important that people actually, you know, follow through on their beliefs. And I think it's fantastic that Jordan Peterson was willing to stand up and speak out. And I think that he's going to continue to focus on creating more online content and online resources. And he'll actually be able to have a much greater impact on individuals with less censorship, with less reins on him, right, by the administration at U of T. Sandra, well, if it is true that existing Ukraine regime killed citizen protesters, that might be reason for anti-Ukraine sentiment. Ooh, interesting. I haven't necessarily seen a lot of coverage on that, but yeah, if government is killing protesters, that's definitely a big issue. Al's confirming it is still the big four. All right, I thought it was Enron. Yes, that was the company I was trying to think of. Thank you, April. I've been watching Russia Today. Was wondering what happened to them. This censorship is stupid. Absolutely agree. And again, like you should know, eyes wide open, that Russia Today absolutely is going to push Russia propaganda. But it's also just so shocking to me that so many Canadians are so naive to think that that only happens in countries like Russia or that only happens in countries like China, but it couldn't happen here in Canada. And my biggest question is why? What makes us so drastically different? And the answer is there isn't a good justification for it. And in fact, there is a reason that the CBC would want to toe the line of the government. Like at this point in time, to understand, like any party that was going to run on a platform of defunding the CBC are naturally going to find themselves at loggerheads with the CBC. And is the CBC really, truly going to be able to give independent, unbiased coverage? Absolutely not. And so what that actually means is CBC essentially becomes the media wing of any parties that are either indifferent to it or proactively supporting it or looking to grow its budget and its sphere of influence. JJ says, out of 42,000 Pfizer vax injuries looked at in a 3-month period, 47% mild to moderate, 50% permanent, and 3% death. So I'm guessing that's in regards to those documents I shared. Again, I haven't had a chance to really dive deep into it, but appreciate you sharing what you took away from it. Whoa, I thought those maps were about cellular service coverage across the U.S. Yeah, again, it's just wild that like we can go from like, you're extreme risk. Ain't no big deal. You don't need to wear a mask anymore. Terry says C11 equals control public info. Absolutely. It's the info war designed to influence public thoughts. Yeah, it really is. And that's why I think it's so important that we create awareness amongst average Canadians, right? Because again, I get why a lot of Canadians just want to ignore this stuff. I get why they don't want to dwell on it, right? Like one, it's just kind of negative shit. So I understand not wanting to go down those negative rabbit holes. But two, they've got a mortgage payment, they've got kids, they're trying to figure out, are they allowed in a restaurant right now or whatever. But we can't just let Ukraine and COVID distract us from the fact that our government is trying to continuously increase censorship in our country. Not cool, in my opinion. Pfizer originally said they wouldn't release that info for over 70 years. Yeah, thank God that judge, had the balls to actually force Pfizer to have some accountability in real time rather than being able to drag it out over 70 years. Tara says, the government has zero good intentions when they try to create a universal basic income system, as opposed to putting money towards helping people start businesses and giving incentives to do so. This is not being created for our good, but instead for more government reliance equaling more government control. Absolutely. It's going to create more government control. It creates more bureaucracy, which creates more people that have a vested interest in seeing the government continue to propagate and grow and expand. It's a never-ending it's just a never-ending expansion, right? Like, they just want to continue to see their little fiefdoms and their areas of control grow. Benjamin says, hey, everyone, thanks for being here and interacting. Appreciate it, and appreciate you jumping in the comments. Michael says, hey, Matt, are you thinking of running for a political party or position at all? No, I'm really not. One, I think that I can still be better served just like speaking my mind and stuff like that and trying to influence the culture. Anyone that wants to run for politics, I encourage you to get involved, whether that's, helping someone, whether that's, running yourself. I think we need to see more people involved in politics. One thing I was thinking about earlier today, in fact, was I hate the idea of career politicians. Understand that if your only job in life has been in politics or working for the government, if your best, highest use, right? If the way that you can make the most amount of money is in politics, in my opinion, that should almost disbar you from politics. Because what we should have is actually like just people for periods of life, right? That are coming in with life experience. They've worked as a small business owner. They've worked as an employee at multiple different companies. They've worked as a farmer, right? They've worked in trades, or whatever the case may be. I'd much rather see people come in for like 4 years, 8 years, 10 years, and then bounce, right? This idea of like starting off as a politician in your 20s and essentially continuing on into your twilight years. Those are the people that I personally think we should be most concerned about when it comes to politics, because it just creates a greater opportunity for corruption. And again, if your highest, best employment opportunities are simply in politics, well, then you're going to kind of say whatever it takes and do whatever it takes to stay in power. And that's not a good thing, right? We actually want to, I think, have real citizens participating in the political discourse, real citizens participating in being politicians for periods of their life, but not having their life revolve around politics. So again, that's just my personal hot take. I may change my mind down the road. If you guys are in London, I encourage you to look into Tommy Caldwell. He's going to be running for as a MPP in London. I forget what section of London he's in, but I'd really encourage you guys to look into Tommy. There's other great Canadians, I think, that are being pulled into politics based upon what they've seen play out over the last 2 years. And again, I think that those are great individuals to turn to if you're looking to find someone to support. But again, if you guys are so inclined to take on the mantle yourself, I encourage you to do so. Again, it's not necessarily just about winning, right? It's literally just about even understanding the political process more, understanding, and like, I think that our civics program, the education around it, right now, we essentially have the system breeds an indifference, except for among like an elite class of individuals, right? Whose parents were politicians, whose grandparents were politicians, their aunts and uncle are politicians, or they're in government administration, things of that nature. Again, I just find it very disconcerting, in my opinion. Bite Hunter, I feel sorry for Russia because everyone is picking on them for wanting all their people back. Yeah, again, it's not clear cut in my opinion, but certainly the demonization of the average Russian citizen, I don't think does anyone good. Dragonfly, is that a RT flag as your backdrop? I'm not sure what an RT flag is, but no, it's just 2 red and blue pillars. If anything, I know people have mentioned that it looks like the book 48 Laws of Power, which again, I enjoy that book, but that was an unintentional thing. Literally, we just wanted something bright to highlight the backdrop. Safe Space Cafe just watched Question Period. Okay, I'm not sure if I understand, but appreciate you jumping in the chat. Terry, Matt, hope you get to 1,000 followers soon. 7 away, you deserve it. Awesome, appreciate it. I think I'm more than 7 away, unless a bunch of people just subbed tonight. But again, appreciate it either way. See someone's speaking poorly of Freeland. I don't even think you need to focus on her physical appearance in order to find fault with her. I think that there's more than enough about her personality in that regards. But anyways, appreciate you guys hanging out with me on a Tuesday night. I know there's a lot of things competing for your attention. So the fact that you would spend it with me while we kind of explore the craziness that is the world we live in. Again, just know you're not alone. There's like-minded individuals out there. If you haven't found them, you just need to start looking harder for them, because I think that this entire Freedom Trucker Convoy has created a lot of general awareness, and a lot more individuals now are willing to speak out, share their honest opinions. And while it may seem like we're still on a bad trajectory, we probably are, we're not alone. And that's huge, right? It's when you feel isolated, when you feel scared, when you're fearful, that's when, one, people make really poor decisions, and two, oftentimes when people just become completely paralyzed. And so it's important that you continue to focus on improving your lot in life. Despite what they may want to tell you, we actually do exist still somewhat in a meritocracy, and you can control the trajectory of your future. And it's just a matter of focusing on what you can control and, taking action upon it. So again, I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, all that good stuff. And I'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, with another episode of the Maple Pill. And we'll play our outro song.
Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chat, believing in my own will. Web fire, math evil, scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it.